Good afternoon. I'm Alina Polyakova. I'm the president and CEO of the Center for European Policy Analysis. It's really a pleasure to welcome all of you here today for, I think, what's going to be a very interesting and timely conversation with Prime Minister Boris Johnson. We're so honored to have you with us today.
So great to be here. Thank you very much. I love the way you call me Prime Minister. It's a courtesy title that does not exist in the United Kingdom. I should reassure all UK media here.
Okay. Mr. Johnson, welcome. It's great to have you.
No, I like it. America, it's fine. I know, it's great.
Well, I think all of you know former Prime Minister Johnson, who served as the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom and Foreign Secretary prior to that, as well as Mayor of London prior to that, and also the author of now 11 books. Including a fantastic book on Churchill, which I think is so relevant and timely for the current era. And I know we'll talk about that today. So, Prime Minister, let's get into it.
Yes.
Without further ado, you have been an advocate for Ukraine.
Yes.
And during your leadership, your premiership, the UK was the first country to deliver lethal aid to Ukraine, even prior to the full-scale Russian invasion, and to deliver artillery systems and weapons.
First European country.
First European country, that's correct.
Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit more about why you supported Ukraine at that time, and why you continue now as a private citizen to advocate for Western support for Ukraine? Why is it so important to you?
I supported Ukraine just for the obvious reason that it was morally abominable that an innocent European country was being attacked and civilians were being murdered in large numbers, and there was an act of wanton aggression on a scale we hadn't seen for 80 years. Putin unleashed the biggest war in Europe since the Second World War. So obviously I was supporting Ukraine for moral reasons, for legal reasons, for humanitarian reasons. But I also, and those are the primary reasons, but I would say that from the point of view of the United States and the UK, there are also enormously powerful strategic reasons for wanting to support Ukraine. And they are that, number one, if Ukraine falls, then you have the risk of further Putin revanchism all around the periphery of the former Soviet Union. He won't stop there. You saw his extremely creepy interview with Fox. It wasn't Fox News. Sorry, forgive me. I got it wrong. It was some guy who used to be on Fox News. You saw that thing where he seemed to think that Poland was responsible for the outbreak of the Second World War. And didn't seem to understand what the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact was all about. You saw what he had to say. It is chilling. Number two, strategically, if you want to prevent that kind of thing, if you want to guarantee the security of the Euro-Atlantic area, if you want to save American tax dollars, potentially trillions of tax dollars in decades to come, trying to undo the damage of future such aggression, then supporting Ukraine is immensely cost efficient. You haven't got any American boots on the ground at all, and you are fighting for freedom. And most importantly, perhaps from a US strategic point of view, you're sending a message to Beijing that aggression and the changing of borders by force is not going to be tolerated, is not easy, and is likely to end in disaster. And these are very powerful strategic considerations. I would also say there are other points you could make as well. I think that the supplemental budget that is I think everybody, certainly I'm praying, is going to be approved. And I should preface all this by saying how deeply I respect what the US has done, and how indebted, I believe, that the world is once again to the people of the United States of America for the support that they have given. And it's been fantastic, and it's been transformatory for Ukraine. Mm-hmm. But unfortunately, the situation is grim, and the delay is terrible right now. Well, and so if we mean what we say about helping them, mm-hmm. and if we mean what we say about doing it, helping them for as long as it takes, or whatever the mantra is, then we have to get that supplemental budget approved. Absolutely.
Well, let's talk about what's happening today in Ukraine. You said the situation is
most of the money. Sorry, just final thought from the American point of view. Most of the money, whatever it is, 60 billion or whatever the expenditure is of course going to go into the U.S. economy. And it's going to drive jobs and growth here in the United States. Don't forget that elementary point as well.
Well, you're absolutely right. I wish that our Congress had renamed the Ukraine Supplemental the U.S. Defense Investment Act, because that's actually what it is. It's going to jumpstart our own defense industrial capacity in a significant way, and we need it. Yeah. But I want to turn to what's going on in Ukraine right now. You said the situation is grim. Over the last several days, we have seen a massive uptick in air attacks by the Russian side on Ukraine's energy grid, on civilian targets, and they seem to be having a lot more success. And a lot of that is due to the fact that Ukrainians simply are losing the ability to defend themselves because they don't have the systems, they don't have the missiles, and they don't have enough ammunition. You were just in Ukraine in February to mark the very solemn mark of 2 years since the start of the full-scale invasion. You saw President Zelensky and others. What is your sense of the situation on the ground and of morale, given the situation here on support for Ukraine?
My sense is that the morale of the Ukrainian people is obviously fragile. Things are tough, but they're determined, and they're going to fight for their country. I did not get anywhere any sense of defeatism or any sense that they think that they're going to lose. They don't think they're going to lose. And I tell you what, I also find they believe, and this is what's so important for us to, they believe in us. They really think that we are going to stick with them, and we have to vindicate that faith. Just because of the things we've already said. I think it's worth remembering what would have happened if Putin had succeeded on February the 23rd, 2022. And just imagine, which is, by the way, what all my defense intelligence people were saying was going to happen. They said it would be over in days, and it would have been a dark ages for Ukraine, and a kind of a world in which there was forced Russification, in which journalists were shot, politicians, poisoned or taken to the gulag as they are in Russia now. Just imagine what would have happened to Ukraine, and what the Ukrainians have achieved in fighting that off with the help of US weaponry has been astonishing. And they've recaptured more than 50% of the land that Putin originally took. We must never forget what they've achieved, right? Because we sometimes just listen to this endless barrage of terrible news. And they've incapacitated about 40% of Russia's Black Sea Fleet. I can't remember the exact numbers. It's a huge amount. And they've killed a huge number of Russian soldiers. And they've shown themselves to be a really, really formidable fighting force. But, every time I go and see them, it's the same. And it was no different in Kyiv this time. They are just praying for that kit. And it is frankly horrendous that they are being forced to fight without the wherewithal to protect themselves from Russian munitions. and without, so they need the air defenses to protect their cities and their infrastructure, which are now taking a real hammering, and more of the, as you say, more of the missiles, the Russian missiles are now getting through, and they need the shells. They need artillery to give their troops cover and to fight back, and their casualties are now very severe. And I just do not understand why we in the West, for this relatively trivial outlay, can't just make these elementary commitments and give them what they need. Remember, Ronald Reagan basically won the Cold War by outspending the Soviet Union on defense. We have the and Putin is now ramping up his production of weapons. We have the opportunity, if we get our act together, to ramp up our production of military equipment for Ukraine and turn this thing round. Because believe me, they can win. They've shown that they can win. I think they will win, but they just they need the kit. And that's their feeling that comes through again and again. There's no deal they can see they can do with Putin. I mean, nobody comes up to me furtively and says, "Oh, but by the way, we could trade this and this, and let's cut a land for peace deal." Nobody suggests that. It's not. They and I think any Ukrainian politician who tried to do it would be in a very difficult position.
Well, Mr. Prime Minister, let me follow through on that line of thought, and then stick with Ukraine for a second. What do you say to those who say, "Look, let's look reality in the eyes. The Russians concede this war forever. They don't care how many Russians die, hundreds of thousands, maybe even millions. They've ramped up their war economy production. They can outproduce us in ammunition right now, which is really shocking if you think about it.
But they can't. I mean, it looks as though they can at the moment, but our economies are, 25, 30 times the size of Russia. It's ridiculous.
So we obviously have the capacity and the potential to defeat the Russians. There's no question about that. There's no competition there. But what do you say to those people who say, look, the Russians, this is their forever war. They're going to commit anything they can to this. And the Ukrainians are facing a problem with mobilization. There's simply not as many Ukrainians as there are Russians. And the Ukrainians care about the lives of their citizens in a way that certainly Putin and the Kremlin does not. So what do you say to those people who say, look, let's look at the numbers. How can Ukraine win? Is this a winnable war?
Yeah, but the people who are saying that are Putin and the Kremlin apologists and the propagandists. I mean, that is very much their line. And that's what you will hear on from those parts of the of Fox News and so on that have been infected by this line of thinking. It's demonstrably not the case. Ukraine can and I think, given the right kit, will win. And let's flip that round. If Putin has to withdraw from the bits of Ukraine that he currently occupies, is it really? Everybody says, "Oh, it will be a disaster for Vladimir Putin. At the end of, there'll be a putsch in the Kremlin. There'll be, unforeseeable consequences, the breakup of Russia, blah blah fish cakes." Really, he has total control over the organs of opinion in Russia. He can present almost anything as a conclusion, a success for his special military operation. He can say that the place was purged of Nazis or whatever. Not that there were any Nazis to begin with. There are ways through for Putin. There are ways through for Putin to end this thing, get out, and claim some sort of moral victory. Russian language has been preserved. Ukraine has agreed this. That Russian culture will be respected and so on, so on. All sorts of things that he could claim. But if Putin succeeds, and we are, I think that you're right, Alina, and I think that the risk is that actually, if we keep delaying, unless we give the Ukrainians what they need, it's becoming pretty clear that the Russians, by a combination of attacking cities, attacking infrastructure, and grinding forward, they may be able to make a breakthrough. And the Putin's ambition is to get Kyiv. He wants to complete this thing. He wants to take control of the whole country. And I've got to say that if that happens, I think it would be an absolute catastrophe for the West, and a catastrophe for America and for any concept of American leadership. So, and I think it would be, I think it would be a reverse bigger than Vietnam. Because this would be big. When I say bigger than Vietnam, I mean because this would be NATO. This would be NATO. After 80 years, 75 years of success, this would be NATO that had failed for the first time in a European war, because NATO has been trying to support Ukraine. NATO countries would basically have been shown to have been too weak, too irresolute, and the message would be, I think, absolutely disastrous. And I really can't believe that any American president or incoming American president is going to want that to happen on his watch.
So let's connect the dots here a little bit. The Prime Minister of Japan was just here in Washington, and he addressed the U.S. Congress, and he mentioned Ukraine 9 times.
Yeah, that's because, and Fumio Kishida, who I've known for many years, is very clear-eyed about this. Unlike so many other people, he really sees the direct read across between Russian victory in Ukraine and massive instability in the Asia Pacific region, and he sees the consequences for his country, for Japan, and obviously for Taiwan. And so for American congressional leaders who are thinking about that risk, I think there's a sort of muddle going on at the moment where people are thinking, well, rather than worry about Ukraine, we should worry about Taiwan. But the whole point is you avert disaster around the world if you stop Putin succeeding in Ukraine. And the cheapest, most efficient way to show that the West is still up for it, is still capable of defending democracy, freedom, boundaries, rule of law, is for the Ukrainians to win.
So looking ahead a couple of months, we have an important event, which is the NATO summit. Will be held here in Washington in July. It's the 75th anniversary, as you mentioned, of the alliance. We've had 2 new members join, Sweden, Finland. Certainly these are things to be celebrated.
Yeah.
But as far as we know and understand right now, there's no clear path that's going to be presented for Ukraine to join NATO at the summit. You have previously said that Ukraine should join the alliance. Yeah. How is that possible if there's an ongoing war in Ukraine? How do you see the path forward?
So first of all, it's worth dwelling for a second on your point about Finland and Sweden, and that really is a comment on how catastrophically Putin has miscalculated in his whole venture already. He's got 2 historically neutral countries now aligned firmly against him and against Russia. But the problem of Ukraine, unless we get it into NATO, unless we get Ukraine into NATO, the problem of Ukraine will remain. The problem of Ukraine was caused by ambiguity and uncertainty about Ukraine's status, and we need to fix it. The only way forward is the stability and the certainty that comes from NATO membership. Now, the problem is a chicken and egg problem, which everybody can see, which is that you can't, under the rules, and it's very difficult practically to get a country into NATO while its boundaries are contested. It hasn't happened. Well, I suppose you could argue it happened to post-war Germany, but it's a difficult thing to to pull off. And so that's the problem, the barrier that's put in place of Ukrainian membership. But of course, that gives Putin an incentive to continue to protract the war and to continue to torment Ukraine, because that's his way of keeping Ukraine out of NATO. So we need to find a way of breaking that, of squaring that circle, of breaking through that chicken and egg problem, and starting a process of getting Ukraine in, irrespective of the fact that its boundaries are still contested violently. And and I say that because we've tried not having Ukraine in NATO. That's what this is all about. We made various statements that seemed to encourage Ukrainian membership of NATO, but then failed to go through, failed to deliver on any of them. And the result of that ambiguity has been total disaster. So we try. The not having Ukraine in NATO led to the worst war in Europe for 80 years, and huge number of civilian casualties. The only way forward is to start getting Ukraine into NATO. And I think the problem at the summit in Washington is going to be here. People are going to be very hesitant. But what this thing has taught us is that delay and hesitation are making it worse. It was delay and hesitation in giving the right munitions that have protracted this, and it's the delay with the supplemental that's causing so many problems with the Ukrainians right now.
So let's talk about that for a moment. The delays, the lags in deliveries, all of these things have happened in the last 2 years that have led not to a policy of victory for Ukraine, but I think a policy of Ukraine just not losing.
Yeah,
right? What do you think, if this keeps going at this pace, regardless of what happens with the U.S. elections, whether that's President Biden's second term or former President Trump's second term, what do you think is the sense in Europe and among our European allies, and the UK being our closest ally, of course, about the consistency and the reliability of the United States in Europe in particular?
Look, I think that I go back to what I said earlier on about the significance in Europe and around the world of a Putin victory. It will be a colossal shock. I mean, the retreat from Afghanistan will be nothing compared to Putin winning in Ukraine. Nothing. And the message will, China's basically bankrolling Russia completely now, right? And the Chinese increasingly think that they've bet on the right horse. Because the longer we delay, the more irresolute they think we are. And so, to your point, Alina, I think people will think we've lost the plot, and it will look like the beginning of the end of American hegemony. It'll look like the beginning of the end of Western hegemony. It really will. And is that what you want, folks? I mean, honestly, the tragedy is that this could be fixed with what is, by any standards, such a modest outlay. So let's just get on and do it.
Hear, hear. Well, Mr. Prime Minister, I'm sorry, I'll keep calling you that because we keep the titles here in the United States.
Make me come in handy.
I really appreciate the time you're taking to have this important discussion with us. I have one last question for you. We are in a really dire situation. We know the politics here in the U.S. Congress. We have an election coming up that could be decisive. You have publicly endorsed President Trump.
I with a caveat.
Tell me.
The caveat was that he has to do the right thing on Ukraine. If you mean the piece in the Daily Mail, yeah. I mean, look, I mean, so what I said in a closely argued but evidently widely unread piece in the Daily Mail was that when you actually look at the substance of what Trump did in the White House on foreign policy, you can make a case for quite a lot of it. I think he took firm action on Bashar al-Assad's use of chemical weapons, which compared quite favorably with the inaction of the previous administration, and indeed the UK itself in 2013. He gave the javelins, right, which was not insignificant. He was very tough on the IRGC Quds Force, to put it mildly, which I don't think was a bad idea in retrospect, though everybody freaked out at the time. I think you can make a case for things he did. So that emboldens me to say, well, come on, if he can show that spirit in office again and show the urge to make America great again in the way that I believe America needs to show that it's great again, then that could be a very good thing for the world. Yeah, I make no secret. That's what I think. But there's a big if there.
Do you think Europe is ready for another Trump presidency?
Yeah, look, I mean, of course they are. This is a hilarious idea. I mean, I watched it. I watched it last time, and the point about the president of the United States, and this is what has got. And by the way, this is a good thing, and we've got to protect this. When the president of the United States goes to a European summit and arrives with this huge convoy of preposterously expensive black vehicles which clog the streets of whichever tiny, lovely, beautiful European capital or Cornish village or wherever he arrives. What happens is that the European, whoever he or she, the president may be, and whatever they may say about that president when they want to look cool to their own electorate, in the privacy of the summit meeting, and when they actually have the chance to make nice to the US president, it is like watching a tribe of baboons offering acts of simian homage to the leader. However baboons do that, which I don't propose to describe. But that is basically what they do. Because that is, all human institutions require a leader, and that's just the way life is, and the world is no exception. The world, and frankly, I would rather, of course, I'd rather the UK was the world leader, but those days are long gone. I would. You
had a good run.
Yeah, we had not as long as some people, but I would rather have a liberal capitalist democracy as the global hegemon, and I'd rather have America. And what's happening now in Ukraine is incredibly important. I would say critical for that vision of the world.
Well, Mr. Prime Minister, thank you so much for this conversation. I really appreciate your time. Let's give the Prime Minister a hand.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.